Judith, Vanessa. Ah, Vanessa, thank you for joining. Stefania, thank you for joining. I'll have to. Okay.
Oh wow, there's a lot of people joining.
Yeah.
Is it going through the invite? Oop.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you good. Just trying to make sure I can connect with the Instagram.
Okay,
Are you be able to send me the? Oh, there it is. There we go. Yes. All right.
Ah, Joseph. Okay, great. Put the phone up a little bit. Is the image good?
Yeah, it's going good.
Yes. Thank you, Joseph, for joining us. I'm hearing my echo.
Yeah.
The other people
I think it's
as
because
well?
of the earphones, so there's probably a little bit of a delay on Instagram.
Ah, okay. Yeah, but the people can tell us in case you hear the echo as well. So Joseph, thank you for joining us today. First of all, I would like to talk about this idea of being here and organizing those lives. We started to think a little bit during this moment of physical distancing, what we could do to promote respect for diversity, which we have been doing since 2009 in a cultural setting, but go make it broader. So we decided to invite some of our alumni to talk about their experience being part of minority groups. So Joseph immediately accepted our invitation. Joseph was an intern at our team at Brazilian Experience in 2018. He graduated in journalism at Ohio State University with a minor in Latin American Studies. And he's currently an English teacher. So Joseph, please talk a little bit about yourself as well. And welcome. Thank you so much.
Okay. Hi everybody. I see we have looks through Instagram a little bit of a international crowd, so I will go ahead and introduce myself a little more. I'm Joseph Schmittgen. I am a Inspire Fellow at the KIPP Columbus School in Columbus, Ohio, and I help primarily with third grade English. So it's my first year working there, but I am looking to work my way up and do some more stuff. Hopefully teach history is something I'm pretty passionate about. And of course, pursuing higher education and more degrees. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. So if you don't know where Ohio is, it's not a very popular state. It's not like your New York's or California's, but Ohio is a state in the United States of America. So if you have an idea where New York is, it's in the northeast corner of America. If you go a little bit of ways west past Pennsylvania, then you'll hit Ohio. And so, yeah, I came to the idea of Brazilian Experience because I had always had an interest in travel. Before attending college, I spent 8 months doing a gap year in Germany. So what they say is a lot of times when you start traveling, you catch something called the travel bug, which is where even when you're back home every few months, you'll feel the urge to want to go again. So I felt that urge my sophomore year of undergrad. And then I just started taking international studies. And so I started taking classes primarily in Latin America. I always viewed Latin America as one of the mysteries of the world. It was a region that I thought wasn't that too exposed, at least in American media, besides certain popular topics concerning the U.S. relations with Mexico. So I particularly grew an interest with Brazil because I felt Brazil was a country that I didn't know anything about. I didn't think it was exposed enough to me. So, and through taking a Brazilian history class, I came to the idea that I may have wanted to visit. So just through searching, I found Brazilian Experience. And then upon being maybe a struggling college student, Brazilian Experience offered me the opportunity to work for them for a discounted price, which helped pave the way for me to go down to Curitiba, and then I worked there.
Yes, 2 years ago. So, Joe, entering our topic, I would like to start by asking you, how did race play a role as you grew up?
It was a very important role, and maybe this is where a lot of Brazilian people will maybe be able to empathize or feel similarly to. I grew up in a biracial home, so I grew up with an African American mother and a white father. For people in Brazil, that's probably very common. For people in the States, that's very uncommon. That's not very common up in the United States. So I grew up in that household. So the topic of race and race discussions was very common just because of the different places and the different circumstances both my father and my mother had to encounter, especially early on in their marriage. And then I also grew up in Shaker Heights, Ohio. It's a town outside of Cleveland, Ohio, and we were historically known for being one of the first neighborhoods in America to really welcome integration into the community. And so I didn't just grow up in a community where there were black and white, but where black and white truly mixed together, where people hung out. It was not segregated like some towns are that have a black and white population. It was also very socioeconomically diverse, meaning that it wasn't uncommon to see children who come from black children who may come from poor backgrounds go to hang out with their richer white friends in their mansions and bigger homes and things like that, and vice versa, poorer white children hanging out with wealthier black children. So because of that, I had a very organic introduction to the topic of race. It was a very healthy environment when it came to race. And it really helped me learn about when it comes to the topic of identity and being an African American male. Whereas I feel that in America, sometimes you're brought to that conversation and based off of more negative events that happened. Whereas where I came from, it was very positive. It was very empowering. I had black teachers, I had black role models, I had black mentors. So I grew up in a very positive environment.
And how did this make a difference for you? Like, do you have other colleagues who grew up in different conditions, perhaps like black neighborhoods, which didn't have this discussion in this family, or these like colleagues of other races? How do you see the difference it made for you, like practically?
Well, very, very simple. I had a colleague in my home, my mother. So her life, yeah, her life was she comes from Chicago, Illinois. And then for those who don't know, Chicago is one of the most known to be one of the most segregated cities in America. So a lot of African Americans live on the south and west sides. West sides also has a very high Latino population, whereas the northern side is a very white population. So growing up, it was just kind of known that if you're from the south side, you stay here and you don't ever venture up north. There's countless stories about African Americans going to the north side and either being pulled over by police officers, not welcome in businesses, and things of that nature. Luckily, the family I grew up in was very proud, was a very prideful family, a very loud family. So they didn't let things like poverty within their neighborhood keep them down. They really did work hard. My mom was very smart and was able to use her brains to get herself out of that situation. And now as a pharmacist, she still faces discrimination today. Very oftentimes, you'll see this happen at her pharmacy where people won't think she's the pharmacist because of her gender, and B, her skin color, and say, oh, is the pharmacist in today? They oftentimes think maybe she's the helper. And then also there's a bit of colorism. So my mother is more of a darker complexion, and there can be a stigma as far as body image for people who have our darker complexion as opposed to lighter complexion African Americans that are seen as less attractive and less pretty and things like that. So those were things that she had to overcome. As far as my colleagues, especially who grew up in maybe poorer neighborhoods than I did, they're definitely historical events that have transpired that have contributed to African Americans in the United States being put into poverty and maybe not given the same hand that Caucasian neighborhoods are given to strive in the United States. And I would say the best way to compare it, to not get in too deep, to make it simple, is that a very popular actor, Chris Rock, pretty much described it. Basically, imagine if we're all running a race, but one contestant always has like ankle weights on them. So we're all running the same race, but for some of us, it's just a little bit harder. So part of being African American in the United States sometimes feels like we just have to push a little bit harder than our contemporaries, given our circumstances. Everything from food deserts, meaning that in the United States, if you're in some of the less fortunate communities, we have less access to healthy food options, less access to good grocery stores, less access to transportation, public transportation, less access to good education, less funding for the schools that are primarily African American as opposed to schools that are primary Caucasian. So there's all these systematic things that happen that definitely make it a little bit more difficult to grow up as an African American as opposed to some Caucasian Americans.
So you mentioned that you had this positive environment, but do you recall any struggles that you faced pertaining to race, to racial issues?
Yeah, a lot of things come from the media. So being in journalism, you learn the term, if it bleeds, it leads. So meaning that news stations will like to capitalize on stories that are more dramatic, more violent in nature. And a lot of times those violent stories more often than not happen involving African Americans. And so it's just those things where you see people in popular media be painted in that kind of light consistently. And then growing up as an African American, trying to find your pride and understanding what you are in your identity. And then growing up when you learn about the centuries and centuries of slavery and Jim Crow and different segregation, which for people who don't know, after slavery was abolished, there's pretty much more government practice put into that oppressed African Americans, not very different from Brazil. And when you get kind of hit over the head with those things over and over again, sometimes it's hard to continue having a good or positive outlook about your identity as African American. So it does make it hard sometimes to move past those things and try to search for the positive sometimes.
Yeah. Did it really affect like your perception of beauty or body image?
Not necessarily for me, but I know for a lot of females, it does. Especially here from my mother, it's you know, it was always the fair skinned was always better. To be darker was worse. To do your hair, I know for a lot of African American women to straighten their hair and to use things like wigs and fake hair. To make it more resemble that of a Caucasian woman's hair as opposed to wearing their more natural hair. That's something I was actually very happy to find in Brazil, seeing more African women wearing afros and more natural hair. So those are things that you definitely see. On the male side, there's a little bit less as it pertains to body image. There may be certain stereotypes as it pertains to sports, as in there's a stereotype that African Americans are just generally better at sports than other races are. So when people view you as like, they think, why aren't you fast enough? Why can't you jump high enough? Those things do hurt, but luckily, I've I've been able to develop some thick skin when it comes to body image.
Yeah. What about traumas? Have you experienced any kind of trauma, like verbal or physical assault because of race?
Uh, it's never like so trauma it namely does, especially as of recently with the murders of George Floyd and things like that. So never anything physical that has happened to me, but it's seeing things happen to people of my same complexion. So whether it was George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd by police in a in Minneapolis, or currently the push for justice for Breonna Taylor in Kentucky, but especially even if it's near home. For me, when I was a senior, the big story was when a 12-year-old boy, Tamir Rice, was murdered by police. So seeing those things common, it can create a type of post-traumatic stress. So I definitely know that firsthand. So whenever I'm driving and I may see a policeman approaching, to me, my heart starts beating a lot faster, because from seeing that constantly, you always think, what if that was me? So whenever you do see police nearby, for a lot of African Americans, the thought is immediately, this could be me. I don't want this to be me. So you almost see like your life flash before your eyes when sometimes, but that's as far as I can say as far as trauma.
Yeah. And what about the George Floyd situation? Like when you heard about those news, how did you feel that? Like in your body, the feeling itself?
Um, personally, I wasn't even able to really watch the videos I've seen enough of them to where I didn't personally need to see it to understand what it was. I've heard enough explanation about what happened, and I fully understand. And it's always just um, understanding well, at least I can say this in my more matured self, as opposed to maybe something I would experience when I was younger, is to understand what is my role as African American? What do I have to do to make this a better place for other African Americans in my own community? And sometimes when you see that stuff, you're just like, what are we as a community going to do um, to rally around? Not even just as an African American community, as Americans as a whole, what are we going to do? So seeing the widespread outrage, I had never seen. If this is what America was like during the '60s, during the initial civil rights movements, this was definitely the biggest sense that I ever seen, just widespread protests across the country. Basically, every major city had their own huge rallies, and even here in Columbus, Ohio, I drive past a church very often, and then there's protesters out there every single day. So, in a way, it's always disheartening to see something like that happen, but at the same time, it's more comforting to see some actual change happen. Of course, we're not satisfied yet with the changes that have been made and are pursuing more changes and justice for the victims of these and the police officers to be fully arrested and convicted. But the positive taken away is to see that there is widespread outrage, that my fellow countrymen do care about what happened and are not going to stop until something does change. The common adage with social media is that something bad happens, it's maybe paid attention to for a couple weeks, but then it'll be forgotten the next. And so I think this is something that definitely won't be forgotten at all. As far as I've seen there's been protests happening here nearly every day, if not every week.
Yeah. Did you join any of the protesters? Did you participate?
Unfortunately, no. I understand my role as a teacher is to stay in the classroom and to be in the classroom every day. I definitely support all the protesters, and I hope the protests still happen. I'm in full support. And so because of that, instead of doing that, I do donate to the causes, and I was in works of planning for maybe a benefit concert type thing. But I know that my role is as a teacher to help raise. My school is 95% African American, so 95% African American kids. So my best protest is raising those kids to be the people they want to be and be the best kids they can be and learn whatever they want and pursue whatever goals that they have. So I think that's my best protest is there.
Yes, for sure. For sure. If you cannot conciliate, this should be the priority. But Joseph, I remember when you were here in Brazil that you used to love to watch the videos of Will Smith, and we talked about the Oprah podcast. So hearing you talk about your role as a teacher and your students, which are African Americans, I thought about that. How important it is for you to have those references of people that you admire and that are also from the same race, that are Black people as well. Because I see also videos of people who, like young children, whose dad are like empowering them. So I feel like these models, when you identify yourself with someone that you admire, are very important. How is it for you?
Yeah, it's very important because especially for what was always missing in terms of education in African American communities were African American male teachers. Of course, African American teachers, but especially African American male teachers. Because what a lot of people know is a lot of African American children may oftentimes come from single parent home where the father is not there. So a lot of African American children grow up with the lack of those positive male figures. So being one of those teachers in the school, I do share a important commitment to not only be we had this conversation and work today because we have of course diversity conversations nearly every day now. Is that we wear many hats. We're not just people who are going to tell you how to multiply and how to dot your I's and cross your T's, but we're also there to be your therapist if need be. We're not just telling you how to be knowledgeable, but we're also facilitating that role kind of as parents and therapists to really grow these children to be the people that they really want to be. So I think that's important. But especially for me growing up, and especially now as an adult, more often than not, I look up to so many people now. So I like to find inspiration, and I like to find inspiration in people, whether historical or there's people right near me. I still look up to my grandfather. He will always be my number one role model. But I've, of course, looked up to the Malcolm X's of the world. Um, of course, all those types of people.
Yes, I saw as well, like hearing from friends who work in the US, that after the George Floyd murder, there were a lot of movements in terms of diversity inside the corporations. Like
Yes.
some corporations who created a department or started to put more effort on talking about diversity and inclusion. How did you perceive that living there?
I think it's very important because, of course, living in America, if one thing talks the most, it's money talks in America, and a lot of times, the one who has the most capital a lot of times makes the biggest decisions. So seeing more corporations take a bigger focus towards diversity and inclusion, especially with my school, which is a widespread connection of charter schools across the United States of America. Seeing my school in particular take a big focus towards diversity inclusion means a lot because that means we're not just going to look over some of the problems that may be tied to this systematic oppression. We're not going to look over the problems that may be happening at home that we don't see. We're definitely gonna lend a caring and hand to our students and make sure we offer them the best educational experience they have. And then on the other hand, seeing other companies take that leap. Of course, me being me, I'm always a skeptic. That's one of the 4 agreements. Always be skeptical, especially when it comes to business. Definitely got to analyze the intentions. Are you just doing this because you want me to buy your product? Or are you doing this because you want the world really to be a better place? So it is nice to see that even if they are trying to make me buy their product, that they're at least doing something positive, I guess. But of course, always remaining a little skeptical when it comes to businesses. But it's good to see that at least if they're promoting a message, it's a message that a lot of people will see, and hopefully it will connect to them.
Yes, for sure. The intention is very, very important, always. So you mentioned the school where you teach, and that 95% of the students are African American. So it's a different reality from where you studied, right? Because you mentioned you had
my school was about 50-50, 60-40. This is 95%. So that's it's a bit of an increase.
Yeah. So what advice do you give to your students, to your little students?
Well, first things first is that the thing that really helped in my experience in school and why Shaker Heights was a really good place to grow up was that they let kids be kids, because when you just let kids be kids and you don't tell them anything about race quite yet, they just learn how to be good people first. And that's all you really want someone who's 8 years old to learn to be. You really just want them to have good manners, be a good person, and also be interested in learning, because that 8-year-old has many more years to go of education. So you really want that person to learn to have a desire to learn, and then grow as a person. I kind of view it as like filling someone's cup up. So you don't want to overfill someone's cup when it comes to the conversation of race, because that may oversaturate their brain and how they perceive the world. I know you could see that with some people I grew up with, where the conversation of race was so overbearing, it was so poured onto them so much that they can't view things outside of race, because at the end of the day, we're all people, we're all living a similar human experience. So, but later on in life, when the children become older and they mature better, that then is a better to increase and go into more into depth when it comes to the conversation about race and the history of racism and oppression, because then I think children then, or young people are able to look at the situation with a more matured eye, more matured understanding, and be able to make more, I'll use a smart person word, nuanced opinion, a fully developed opinion. So definitely with third graders, I want you to, of course, to I guess I will say on the part of early child education, you do want to use tools, especially using stories and books that have people that look like them in it. So using stories and fairy tales or whatever you're using that has African American figures in them. I do understand that scientifically does have a positive effect, or has a great effect on children, is seeing themselves, especially as African American or Latino, Latinx people, to see yourself in the things that you're studying, especially if you're studying history, if you're studying to read, studying science, learning about African American scientists and seeing yourself in that role, that is important. But at the ground level, I want kids to, know it's okay. You can go out and play, worry about having fun in school, worry about making good connections with your teachers and your classmates, and make sure you are having a good spirits and you want to come back next year and the year after that. I think that's the most important thing, especially with young children.
Yes, for sure. I love that. Let kids be kids and just play and not worry too much. Be creative and curious. So, in terms of your community, what would you like to see moving forward?
Well, of course, with just where I live in Columbus, if I'm just seeing this outside of the African American community, the good thing about Columbus is because we're a state capital, and we're home to a lot of businesses in America, we kind of get everybody from everywhere. Especially where I live is I can go out my door and there's Korean markets, there's Chinese markets, there's Arab markets, there's all different types of people that just live in my little apartment complex where I live. So that means there's a lot of different people coming from a lot of different places that have a lot of different opinions and a lot of different experiences. And that, in my opinion, can make for the best change, because then when you have all those people meshing together, we're all exposed together, we all learn about one another, and that in turn creates a better community when we're all open, we're not closed off from one another, we're not just used to seeing the same thing. So that's good in that respect. Of course, in the wider Columbus area, we can make more moves to try to bring down walls, especially right in Columbus right now, we're having actually a housing crisis. So there's actually, in that there's not enough homes for people to live. So they have to build more homes. There's too many people moving to Columbus right now. And so what we're seeing is that because they're building a lot in the urban areas, that's raising the prices for people to move to the area. And it's actually moving a lot of impoverished Black and brown people out of those neighborhoods. So I definitely would like to see more affordable housing initiatives in African American communities, greater investment in those communities, because the key in a lot of ways, equity in the United States is through economic equity. So what can we own as a community? That's what I would like to see from the African American community. What we can do now is that I would like to see us come together to what I say, buy back the block, buy our homes, buy our businesses, buy our area, so we can make it so that they can't take the area from us if we own it. And there's tons of different charities that everyone can donate to that go to helping start up Black businesses. So if you are African American, you live in any community near you where you know you have a nice sizable population, try to buy black, bank black, uh, and vote black. So quite honestly, so make sure we have that representation politically and economically. If you're going out to eat, make sure you take the time to go and put your money in the black restaurants. If you're getting your tires done and your car done, go to a black auto shop to get your car done. Because the more money we can put in our own pockets, as opposed to maybe putting it in McDonald's hands or Burger King's hands or the Colonel's hands, the better. So that's how I like to spend my money. As a Black and Muslim American, I'm proud that I shop at namely Muslim and Black stores and things of that nature. So I know where my money's going. I know it's going to small business, which is in a lot of ways the heart of the American identity is giving money to your own community. And so it leaves you sleeping better at night. So that's what I would like to see.
That's very interesting because that's something you are really doing, like it's an action to support your community. Because I guess some people, what I see is that some people sometimes, like in the mind level, have a consciousness that there is an issue, and they even feel like uh, involved in the situation somehow, but they don't take action. And that's one of the things we've been reflecting now, like what can we do to promote more discussions about it? Because sometimes we just, okay, that's an issue where we would like people to be more respectful and just like understand that in a human level, we are all the same, despite of nationalities, despite of races, religions. That's the core of cultural exchange, right?
Yeah.
But some people don't take action to promote it, to support, to assist that change they want to see, right?
So, the thing I would lend to that is that I actually kind of coined this term from a different idea. So a lot of people talk about voter suppression in the United States happening in African American communities. And actually, there's another term called voter depression. So voter suppression is when there are certain actions done to lessen abilities or accesses to voting. And voter depression is when you're so depressed and you have such a negative outlook, especially in the political realm, that you don't vote at all. You don't have any trust in the politicians. So, and that leads to a lot of lack of African American involvement in politics, because for years and years we voted on a lot of times where the African American vote goes. Many times that's who ends up getting elected, and a lot of those electorates that we voted in did not do well by the African Americans, and so that creates voter depression, and that doesn't just exist in politics. It exists in economics, it exists in education, and it exists in many areas of everyday life in the African American community. So when you have this consistent oppression and pressure feel on yourself, when you maybe are a kid who grows up in, I'll just use an example, the east side of Cleveland, where it's very impoverished. You go out every day, doors and windows are boarded up on every home. It almost looks like a war zone happened through it. You don't know who you're going to know the next week, because through violent crime, something might happen to someone you might know. You don't know where your next meal is coming from. You don't know where your next, you don't know if the light's going to be cut off the next day. From that can create a lot of depression on someone. So that can result in people, I guess, choosing not to involve themselves in these different activities. So that's why it's really important for us as figures in the African American community and educators in the African American community to make sure that's not where our heads are at, that we make sure we look to uplift, we look to be a positive voice in our community so that it doesn't lead to that. Because when you have people who are depressed, it lends itself to not caring, not things aren't as important, not wanting to take the extra step and go shop at this business or do this here, where you're told all throughout your life that just the minimum is the best, when us educators, we have to really commit ourselves to telling ourselves that anything is possible. There's always a pathway to do it. It may look difficult now, but there's always a way to be successful. You just have to find it. And it might be harder for you than everybody else, but just know at the end of that path, when you get to where you need to be, you know you're going to be equipped with more skills and more abilities than maybe your contemporaries, because you had to go through a harder path.
There is a comment here, Layman. I am a North African and I've been rejected many opportunities just for being from North Africa. They didn't even care about my skills. That's yeah, that's very, very, very bad. It's quite challenging.
Where are you from in North? Are you still living in Northern Africa, or where in Northern Africa are you from?
You will answer. Sometimes it takes a little bit to show the new comments.
Yeah, because internationally it's a different story. So you never know, because of course, and when you think about whether you're in a place like Italy or Brazil, or you're from Morocco.
From Morocco, okay. And where
Okay.
are you currently living? In the U.S., Layman?
So you're still in Northern Africa.
Morocco.
So unfortunately, that is a different situation, different international situation to be in. Unfortunately, I don't know too much about Casablanca. I do know that I do know. Yeah, I don't know much about.
Morocco,
I don't know much about the history about Morocco besides from the guise of European authors for whatever reason. But of course, internationally, everybody's going through a different situation. Are you Muslim, my brother?
Joseph, maybe what are in the US that you know more? What are some things you think people of other races do not understand about the Black experience? And how can we from other races support?
Yeah, it's what a lot of people don't understand about the Black experience is that it's not always like you see it is on TV. You know, we're not shooting at each other every day. We don't eat fried chicken every day. We don't all play basketball. We can't all rap. We can't and just pinning people with these stereotypes. We're people just like you, and we probably have more in common than we actually have differently. And it's just with the news cycle and media, if coming from afar, if you're from the outsider looking in, it looks as if all African Americans have it extremely hard. All African Americans are depressed. They're living the worst lives. They're living in poverty. It's all terrible doom and gloom, when really African Americans a lot of times can be the most positive people. Sometimes being stripped away from that immense wealth can create an appreciation for the small things, the more important things with life. Being able to have an appreciation for family, respect for your elders, respect for those around you, because you're tighter bound together. We're all we got. People look over African American contributions to society, honestly. in a lot of ways, we've built the countries that we've been brought to. That is main. I would say most countries in the Americas. We've contributed in music in the United States. It was jazz, rock and roll, blues, and hip hop. In Brazil, it was samba. Traditional samba was a direct derivative of African American, African, West African music. And even food, a lot of different rice dishes, greens dishes. Especially, I know you being from Minas, that being the cultural center of Brazilian cuisine. There's been a huge return to focus on the African roots in Brazilian cuisine, especially the United States. There's a lot of different dishes that are practically the same between the two countries, just because of that similarity. So my advice to people is to look deeper into our culture. We're a very interesting culture. Being African, being the African people, we view ourselves, we are the original people. So our history goes back to the origin of man itself. So we are more than just a show. We're more than just dance. We're more than just sports. We're businessmen. We're inventors. We're politicians. We're artists. We're pastors. We're religious people. We're imams. We're all over the place. So there's way more to us than just what you see in a 30-minute news cycle.
For sure. And Lima commented here that people don't know much about us because they don't give the opportunity to introduce ourselves. A lot of prejudices. For example, the case of his religion, that he doesn't have a religion. So yeah, it has to do a lot with the stereotypes. And sometimes I feel like people just need to have a voice. I guess that's the calling, like just need to have a voice, that have the opportunity to see beyond the news, right? To see that, like even Brazil, if you think here, a lot of people have, when the students arrive, I think you probably remember that, Joe, that you ask them, what do you know about Brazil? And they know, oh, the soccer and Pelé or Ronaldinho and the samba and the beautiful beach. All those things that are stereotypes. So we form an image about a culture, about a race, according to the examples we see. That's why it's so important, really, to open more spaces for people to get to know besides what we see on TV, right? And here in Brazil, for sure, our culture, it's a melting pot of different cultures, and the African descendants here in Brazil, they play a very important part in our culture in terms of music and dances, as well as the culinary, as you said. I love like in Bahia. I don't think you had a chance to go there, but in Bahia,
No.
there is a deep influence of African culture, and the food is amazing. The food is amazing. So I guess we just need to remember, as you said, we are all humans. If you think, like, connect, everyone comes from a mom and a dad or whatever. You need to have a mom and a dad. Even if you come from a homosexual couple, there will be a man and a woman to form that family. So we all have dreams. I always like to remember that to our students as well. Like, we all have like love stories, and we get upset about broken hearts. We dream to have a family, and these things that we have in common, despite of origin, are what connects us, right?
Yeah.
So, like, based on your experience in Brazil, what did you see? What are the commonalities you noticed here between Brazilian culture and US culture, and the differences you noticed?
So I oftentimes thought about this. It was almost like going, so as opposed to going to Europe, which was, of course, like its own completely different thing from the United States, very different from the United States. going to Brazil was almost like going to an alternate United States. So very, very, very similar in how it came to be, but just small different things happened. So the country turned out completely different than what the United States ended up becoming. But the parallels between the United States, even Brazil at one point was called the United States of Brazil, I do believe. And yeah, so coming into Brazil, it was actually good because I did take a history of Brazil course beforehand. So I did come in with a lot of historical knowledge, so much so it did come in handy being there, because when you're talking to someone and you know about JBK and all these other presidents and stuff, they're like, why do you know that? But it's a good conversation starter. But coming to Brazil, the race conversation was a very integral reason why I was interested in going there in the first place. I wanted to go to a country with a very knowing that the country had a very substantial African population, and I wanted to see how life was different there and what was similar. I wanted to see what the experience was like. And I guess going to Curitiba, which was in the south, which is known for being primarily more Caucasian Brazilians, but for Curitiba being more northern than the more southern states, it did have a larger African population than other southern cities would. So that gave me the good opportunity to see how the two races interacted and different things like that. And ultimately, I found a lot of parallels, lots and lots of parallels. Of course, music. All musicians, whether they're playing music on the street or you go during the Festa Junina time when people are playing more of that music and other types of bars and stuff like that. You definitely see the music parallel. Of course, I know Brazil also has a huge like reggaeton influence from Jamaica. We have a huge Jamaican influence in our music as well. Of course, everybody knows funk music. That's of course a big part in Brazilian culture. The difference is, however, in that is especially the cool thing about Brazilian culture is that what people don't know historically is that Brazil did take in the largest amount of African slaves in the New World. The U.S. actually very little. But the interesting thing about that is that you would read oftentimes that there were actually so many slaves as opposed to slave owners that the slave owners allowed the Brazilian slaves to withhold parts of their culture. They allowed them to have different ceremonies, and so they were able to take over a lot of things from Africa and bring them to Brazil, which makes for the traditional samba, the drumming, the different music, the different things like that. And then, whereas in the States, Africans were stripped away of their culture completely. So they were made to adopt all types of Caucasian and European attitudes. And so there was very little that we actually held over. And so that was actually very important for me to see, because it was almost like for me being able to witness Africa without actually having to go to Africa. So that was very special to see. And then lastly, I would say is just the incredible mixing. Never had I been in a country where more people actually looked like me, as opposed to maybe I was in Mallorca, which is actually right above Morocco, where people look like me. But the incredible blend of Brazilians is none other than I've ever seen. Just an array of different beiges and browns. I've never seen that before. And the best way someone described it to me is that the United States is more like a painting. So there's a color here, there's a color there. We have all these different things that make this painting what it is, America. But Brazil is very much like a soup. It's everything's mixed together. So, yes. And that definitely, although I know like race is an issue and oppression in African communities in Brazil is a true problem. But ultimately, you do see a little bit more national unity in that case, just because everybody genetically is connected. So it's, what are you going to say bad about Africans when your grandmother's African? It's like you have someone in your family that has darker skin. So racism in that case is a lot less exhibited because people are a lot less separate. Genetically, they're a lot less separate in Brazil than the United States.
Yes.
Whereas,
Yes.
of course,
there's a big mix here in Brazil. Joe, we only have like 4 minutes now because Instagram cuts at 1 hour. After 1 hour, to wrap up, how do you think going abroad and living in a different country on cultural exchange can support understanding? And I would like to thank you. In case it cuts, you have the word.
Okay, so I'll especially say this in the case for my fellow brothers and sisters from African American communities around the United States. It's very important to get out, because then you get to meet your other fellow African brothers and sisters around the world. The thing that the way that Brazilians have always thought that's been different than anybody in the Americas, whether it's Brazilian feminists or Brazilian African rights activists, is that Brazilians always think of the Americas as this whole entity. So we always say, like, if you say you're from North America, Brazilians are like, yeah, you're from America. You're not from North or South America. You're just from America. They view themselves as one thing. And that, from the African American perspective, can get you to think of you as an African, someone of African descent, as connected to this bigger picture of the Americas. We are all children of diaspora. We are all children who came from slavery. We all have come, whether we're from Brazil, Colombia, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Haiti, even Mexico. Mexico had huge Creole population. We all share different brothers and sisters, and by traveling to places like Brazil, for traveling to places like the Dominican, Jamaica, going to all these places, we can see the history of our people in greater detail, and to see our commonalities and see what we can do together as one African people. It's very Garveyist when I'm kind of saying what we are capable of, and we can connect more and learn, and learn how to improve ourselves just by befriending each other. And to this day, I talk with my best friend Fernanda, who's mixed just like me, and took me to a lot of different poetry events and voguing events and different African American parties and stuff. And so I've been keeping those memories to this day.
Yeah, different but the same, despite of races and nationalities, religions. So I think that's the magic of traveling. Thank you, Joel. Thank you so much for joining. And
Thank you.
I hope these rich people will feel empowered and just respect also diversity.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.